Hi, I'm Judith Dreyer, and I want to thank you again for joining me for this podcast series, The Holistic Nature of Us. My intent is to take us, you and I, into a better understanding of the concepts behind our holistic nature and how that ties directly to the holistic nature of the world around us. How can we connect the dots in practical ways that we are nature and nature is in us? I will be featuring authors and educators, practitioners and others whose passion for this earth helps us create bridges. We'll see what's trending, what's relevant to our world today, not just for land use, but to connect the dots between ourselves and nature. It's time for practical action and profound interchange so our natural world is valued once again. Today I am delighted to introduce you to Dana Karcher. She's the program manager for the Arbor Day Foundation's program, the Alliance for Community Trees. And as many folks may know, Arbor Day is coming up on April 27th. So this discussion is timely, and we're going to go into the world of forests and trees and what can we do to help. So welcome, Dana. I'm so glad you're here.
Well, I'm really glad to be here. Thank you very much, Judith.
So tell us about your role with the Alliance for Community Trees.
So the Alliance for Community Trees is a program of the Arbor Day Foundation. And really what the Alliance is a network of nonprofit tree planting and advocacy organizations that are across the country. And those organizations really, in a sense, are the boots on the ground in communities and making communities better through trees. And we work with them to provide them opportunities to plant trees with partners, so we can provide them some funding. We also provide opportunities for them to learn from one another, because networking is extremely important. And then we just give them that opportunity to feel connected to each other. Trees are important no matter where you live, no matter where you play, no matter where you work. And so we want to make sure that there's this connectivity amongst these groups across the country.
That has to be a pretty demanding job because you're connecting the dots with communities all over the country, correct?
Yes, all over the country. And I wouldn't say it's demanding. It's a lot of fun in a lot of ways, and especially this time of year with Arbor Day. We have, all these groups are really unique. There's one-person groups where it's just one person doing this because they're so passionate and they may not even take a salary, where there's larger groups who may have a budget that's in the millions, where they're planting trees in communities and also growing youth organizations, and they're doing all kinds of other things that really impact their community through trees. So they run the gamut, and we get the opportunity to work with all of them.
Could you give us a couple examples of some projects that are going on right now?
Well, we're working with a corporate partner, and we're actually going to be doing 3 tree plantings and 1 tree giveaway this Saturday. One is with our friends, the park people in Denver. Another one is with the California Urban Forest Council in Santa Rosa, California. We're going to be in Houston, Texas, doing a tree planting. And then we've got one more in South Florida, down with our friends, Citizens for a Better South Florida. And all these tree plantings and tree giveaways have something in common. They are all in areas that have experienced some sort of disaster. And that is the common link with our funding partner on this one.
Interesting. So you're working in devastated areas in the country. And what is a challenging part of that besides waking us up?
Well, trees are... I'm going to take each example, I think would be the best way to do it, because trees are important in each of these examples, but for different reasons. Okay. So let's start in Denver. In Denver, there is an insect, the emerald ash borer, who is not quite in the city of Denver yet, hasn't even been discovered, but as we know, has been devastating for us in the Midwest and in the East for a number of years now. And so what we're doing there is we're giving away trees to people to help bring awareness about emerald ash borer to the community, so that they know to look for it, they know that it's coming, and they know that there is a chance that they will lose trees in their neighborhood. Denver has a significant portion of their what we call urban forest or community forest is planted in ash trees, and they want to be proactive to make sure they're getting trees in the ground before that bug hits. Interesting, huh?
It is. Well, we have the ash borer in Connecticut, and
right.
We've seen the devastation of the ash trees and how fast they're dying because of this infestation.
Well, in Santa Rosa, it's completely different. It's about the fires that took place there in the fall. So we're working in a neighborhood that lost significant number of homes, but also significant number of trees in their open space that they take care of. We'll be working with a couple of planting groups there. It's called Fountain Grove Open Space and then the California Urban Forest Council. And this is the first time that we've really been able to get in this soon after a fire. The houses aren't being rebuilt yet, but people feel really connected to the earth, and they want to plant trees because, and this is no pun intended, it helps them feel rooted. Mm-hmm. And they really feel like that's home if they still have greenery showing. And I'm lucky and I'm honored to be a part of that project this coming Saturday. It's going to be very, very good. And in Texas and in, of course, Miami, it's been about the weather. The hurricanes have been devastating to both Florida and to Texas, especially in the Houston area. So the bayous in Houston, I was just down there. They've lost a lot of trees, so they're going to be replanting a number of trees in those areas. And then they're going to be doing some tree giveaway and tree planting in Miami area just to continue to grow the urban forest there. And a little known fact is that a really well cared for community forest and can really actually help prevent damage to other trees. Just need to make sure those trees are taken care of in the first place. So getting trees back in there is really important.
How about that? So you're working not only, when I think of the Arbor Day, I think of reforesting our forests, but what you're talking about is actually replanting our suburban and urban areas that have been hit through disasters.
Right. And we do forest plantings. We do, that is the majority of where our trees are planted, and we do those. We work in all kinds of forests across the country and actually throughout the world with what I refer to as big tree forests. Mm-hmm. And we do a lot of that as well. Millions and millions of trees are planted every year annually in those types of forests. And that is a big part of what we do. It's a big portion of our work, and also just critical for air quality, and then also for watersheds, because trees are really critical in keeping water clean.
Yes, they are. Years ago, I read from an environmental perspective, we need 7 miles of marshland and trees to purify water from one end to the other, so that they're really valuable. And unfortunately, it seems like our shopping malls get built on those type of landscapes because nobody wants to build homes there, and then we have problems with flooding in the malls, and we've reduced the ability of the land to purify our water. Could you talk more about the carbon offset? When I talk a lot at garden clubs and other horticultural societies, that type of thing, and I find that most people are not aware of number one, the role that trees play, but number two, how important it is to bring carbon back into our soil, and of course trees have a role in that.
Yes, they do. And although I'm probably not as well versed on that as I should be, I can tell you that in the comprehensive reporting that we did last year on our trees that were planted in forests and through our recovery campaigns, actually through our tree recovery campaigns, is that 21,000 tons of carbon, was absorbed through these trees. And actually, just to make the numbers a little bit more real, 631 billion gallons of rainfall was intercepted by these same trees. Wow. So there's some big numbers around there, and of course the carbon issue is, or the carbon projects are, they can take place in both urban areas and also in rural areas. And so many organizations want to plant trees to offset their carbon, and we have calculators to do that, and we have ways to do that. But it's very specific on how it's done. And so to get into the detail of that would probably take a whole nother podcast for that. So I don't know if you want to go that way, but I definitely think that, as we plant in urban areas, that's one thing that we are thinking about, as well as in rural areas too. So.
There's a great site, the Tree Benefit Calculator, that I've used a few times. And again, I find when I do classes or presentations, the participants are always amazed that their one lonely oak tree that dumps a lot of leaves in the fall that they're tired of, raking, has so much benefit for that landscape, from as you said, from stormwater collection to bugs that live on the trees to providing coolness and shade to their homes, and which is an economic value.
Right, and it's great. And, to circle back to the Alliance for Community Trees groups, they know that tree benefits calculator, and they know iTree, from which that calculator is based. And iTree's tools are some of the things that we actually require of our member groups when they plant with us. We ask them to be sure to give us a reporting of what benefits these trees will provide into the future. And it makes a huge difference that to tell those stories about the importance of trees. I cannot emphasize enough to the people that I work with that you must have a story about why you plant trees. And if it's using the tree benefits calculator alone, that you can tell a story from what you've learned with that. Or the iTree tools is also the same thing. So having a story is really critical so that people understand why we do what we do when it comes to trees.
Do you have an interesting story?
Oh, I have lots of stories. Well, I'll tell a story, a personal story. So I used to live in Bakersfield, California. Now I live in Lincoln, Nebraska. And Bakersfield, California has some of the worst air quality in the country. And one of the things that I worked on there was I worked with the Air Pollution Control District quite a bit. And my interesting story about using that tree benefits calculator was the opportunity to show scientists from a certified arborist, is what I am, with a degree in political science, to tell scientists who have master's degrees and doctorates, look what these trees can do. And they were so surprised that science was really out there. And this was years ago that they really began to consider trees as part of the answer to air quality. It's still a fight that we battle all the time with air pollution control districts. But I think at the end of the day, we've really opened up a lot of eyes by using these tools. And so showing science to scientists was really a great story for me.
So that is a great story, because they're the ones that are going to play it forward, aren't they?
Yes.
I have another question for you. What is your knowledge about The Hidden Life of Trees? It's a book I just received from Peter. I've got his name written down here somewhere. Peter. Oh dear, where is it? Peter Wolleben. He's from Germany, and he says woodlands are the future of our planet, and how we appreciate them really says something about how we're interacting with the world around us. And of course, my point for this podcast series is about our holistic nature. So he says trees have families, they have memories. We can't just cut them down without regard to their role in their ecosystem community, and disrupt them with our large machines. And do you have any stories or thoughts on that?
I have a whole, I would have a whole bunch of stories on that, but I agree with him completely. That statement to me is very true. There's another book out there called The Wild Trees by Richard Preston. And Richard Preston studied the work of Steve Sillett, who is a professor at Humboldt State University. And Steve and some of his colleagues chased the giant trees up in the redwoods in Humboldt County. And the descriptions about when they would climb to the top of these trees, and many people have seen these pictures in National Geographic magazine of these people climbing these giant redwoods. And when they get up towards, the branches, so the branches themselves have their own ecosystem that's different than the floor. And they have different things growing there, different species of bugs and insects. They have different kinds of fungi growing there. And so there's all kinds of, there's a world we don't know about when it comes to trees. And I have read about trees being so interconnected and communicating, and those studies and that science. But the really cool thing, I think, about what Peter wrote and what Richard Preston has written and what others have written is that tree science is almost new. Although we've talked about it for a long time, how we relate what we know about trees scientifically to the benefits that they provide humans is almost, to me, a new science. I've been doing this for about 18 years. This is a second career for me. And the things I have learned and continue to learn change all of the time. We had something come across our desk this morning where somebody asked us about tree. I can't even remember what the word that they used, but we'd never heard of it before. So we immediately Googled and said, well, it's actually a really, really old term, not a new term. And that has been replaced by another term. So this is a constantly growing field. But we do know that trees are critical to our lives, and imagining our lives without them is one of the stories that many people do tell. I think about a picture of Telegraph Avenue in Oakland, where they actually add trees using Photoshop, and it is one of the most beautiful streets you've ever seen once they add those trees. And I think that right now it's still, it's got new trees on it, but we have to have those visual representations to know what our lives would be without trees in them.
Well, it reminds me of a story I heard for Worcester, Massachusetts, where in 1 week, because of the emerald ash borer, 26,000 trees had to be removed. And they showed before and after pictures, and these were, urban city streets, with single-family homes, and they had these beautiful arching trees. And then the next day they were gone, and it looked like a flood or hurricane came through and knocked everything was gone. So that leaves us feeling stark and naked and empty when we see these landscapes destroyed in that way.
Absolutely. And we've seen the pictures. There's a very famous picture that goes around with emerald ash borer with a neighborhood in Ohio, where the trees are touching the center of the street. It's beautiful. And then 3 years later, all of the trees are dead. And I've seen that in picture used to tell that story, that emerald ash borer story. But, before that, it was Dutch elm disease. And I remember the small town I grew up in, California. We had elm trees along our boulevard, and many of them were hit with Dutch elm disease. And they replaced those with other trees, including ash trees. And they replaced them with eucalyptus trees and locust trees, and it's kind of an interesting forest along the main drag in the town. And it's really those trees have their issues too. But definitely, I remember when those trees came down. I was a young girl, but I do remember that. So,
and the message in those stories is some of these communities didn't know any better, and they planted monocrop trees. They used one variety to line the streets, and then the emerald ash borer comes in, or the Dutch elm disease comes in, and of course we saw what happened with the chestnut trees at the turn of the century. So we have to be more mindful about replanting our urban areas with diversity.
Absolutely. And in Southern California, they're dealing with a number of bugs right now. One is the Polyphagus shot-hole borer, and we really need to be aware of what we're bringing into the country and what where these bugs are coming from and how we can combat them. And we have to be very, very careful. And I think that urban foresters, the people who manage trees in cities, have learned a lot of lessons over the past 15 years and would probably say that this is a very interesting time to be in their line of work. And I you mentioned development, and I agree that we have to be careful how we develop, because we have to be able to save as many trees as possible during development, but also at the same time make sure that we have ordinances that help save trees or replant trees when trees have to be removed.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because they do have to be removed from time to time. But we need to know how to do that with respect to the ecosystem that they inhabit. It's not just about us and our habitat. It's about these species and their habitat, and how can we coexist, right?
And the species that need them as well. I mean,
exactly.
There's a whole, you're right, there's a whole ecosystem around trees, and think about the forest. If you think about the forest, you think about bears and all those kinds of animals as well. And as we move into that, urban wildland interface, we have to be very careful about what we do.
Well, one of the things that I'm fascinated with is that fungal network that occurs with the trees, the shrubs, the plants, that whole underground highway that's so invisible to us. And I love the term mycorrhizal hypha, these beautiful fungi that connect. They're really the internet web of the forest, and how valuable that is. So when we take a tree that's been what Peter calls the grandmother tree away from that ecosystem for development, whatever, we actually seriously disrupt this underground network system. It's not that they can't compensate, but that tree that's been there for 80 years really has a major role there in ways, as you said, we're just starting to learn about.
Right. I agree. We have to be cognizant of those things, and I think that our research and our ability to understand that is just beginning in so many ways. Although I know many great researchers who have been around for years, it's just that their small part of it, connected with somebody else's small part, is really what's telling us how we should be treating these forest systems, as well as our urban forests too.
Right. Dana, do you have 3 easy tips for my listeners today? Something they can take home that's practical.
Well, I would go back to the beginning of our conversation about community and say that there's 3 easy tips here. One would be that if you love the natural green environment, then get involved with your local nonprofit, whether they be a large tree planting organization, or your city, or the Keep America Beautiful organization, or somebody like that who's planting trees, because there is nothing like the feeling of putting your hands in that rich, damp soil and knowing that you're making a difference by putting a tree in the ground. That's number 1. Number 2, if you love your community that you live in, be an advocate for the green space in your community. People are healthier, people live longer, and people are better when they're surrounded by green space. And then the third thing is read. I go back, you mentioned a book, I mentioned a book. I could mention books for days about reading about our urban systems and our forest systems, and read. So, and then share those books with other people. I think that we learn so much, especially in a field that we're not normally involved in. But books like The Wild Trees or American Canopy is another one I could think of. Or Last Child in the Woods talks about children and the relationship that they should have with the outdoors. And those kinds of books give us new insight into something. So I would say plant a tree, advocate for trees, and read about trees.
Oh, that's great. Very nice. And we'll list these books with the authors too. I do. To my listeners, there will be a written transcript of this podcast, and we can list the books there. All right. Well, before we end, is there anything you'd like to share with your contact information about the Arbor Society? What kind of the names of the programs that you are in charge of?
Well, really more than anything else, I think the Arbor Day Foundation, we've been around now for quite some time. We were started in 1972, And actually, Arbor Day, the holiday, was started 100 years before that. So we're honing in on 150 years of Arbor Day. We're pretty excited about that. So that's coming pretty soon. And but we know that April 27th, the last Friday in April, is the Tree Planters Holiday. I love calling it that because I feel like it's important to celebrate trees. So look for opportunities in your communities. And just know that even though you're, like, for instance, Texas and Florida do not celebrate Arbor Day at this time of year. They celebrate it when it's the best time to plant trees. But be involved and look for those opportunities. And our mission to plant, nurture, and celebrate trees is really what it is all about. So we inspire people to do that every day, and we hope that you're inspired by listening to what we've had to say on this podcast.
That's wonderful. And the Arbor Day is arborday.org, correct?
Yes, right now.
And you can find more information about the Alliance for Community Trees on that website, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and they can get in touch with you there or other program directors for other programs that are going on. Well, that's wonderful. Anything else you'd like to leave the listeners with today?
Nope, but plant a tree and smile about doing it, and I thank you for your time.
This is wonderful. Well, I want to thank you, Dana, for joining us at Holistic Nature of Us, and I hope my listeners feel as inspired as I do by your work in particular, but also what you've shared and the Arbor Day in general. It's very practical advice. Our trees are important to us in our landscapes. So this is Judith Dreyer. I'm the author of At the Garden's Gate book and blog. For more information, go to my website, judithdreyer.com, and you will find information about this podcast, the transcript, and upcoming classes. I like to end with a quote from Paul Hawken, an environmentalist and author, who reminds us, sustainability, ensuring the future life on Earth, is an infinite game, the endless expression on behalf of all. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy your day.